I picked up my reading glasses from the windowsill above the kitchen sink and set them in my purse. The chicken and dumplings were still warm on the stove. I had made them from scratch, same as I always did, the way my mother taught me, the way I had made them every Sunday for 40 years. I untied the dish towel from my waist and folded it once, twice, and laid it flat on the counter next to the stove. Then I picked up my purse and my car keys and I walked out the front door of my daughter's house for the last time. I want to tell you how I got there, because it didn't start that evening. It started 3 years earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when my daughter called me crying and I, being her mother, said yes before she even finished the question. My name is Winifred. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at a regional hospital in Dayton, Ohio, and I retired at 62 with a modest pension, a paid-off car, and a 2-bedroom house on Elmwood that I had lived in since my divorce. My yard had a garden. I knew my neighbors. I had friends I met for coffee on Wednesday mornings at a diner 2 miles from my house. I had a life that was small by some people's standards, and exactly right by mine. My daughter is 36. She and her husband, I will call him her husband because that is what he is, though I have other words for him, live in a suburb of Columbus, about 90 minutes from Dayton. They have 2 children, a boy who was 5 when all of this started, and a girl who had just turned 3. The Tuesday she called, she had just found out their daycare was closing at the end of the month. Permanently. No notice, practically. She was crying the way she used to cry when she was a teenager, that full-body kind of crying, and I sat in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and I listened. She said she didn't know what they were going to do. Her husband traveled for work 3 weeks out of 4. She was a project manager at an architecture firm, and she couldn't just leave. They had looked at other daycares, but the wait lists were months long. Could I come? She asked. Just for a little while. Just until they figured something out. Just for a little while. I said yes. I called my neighbor to water my garden. I put a hold on my mail. I packed 2 suitcases and I drove to Columbus. That was 3 years ago. I never went back to Elmwood. Not to stay. I want to be honest about those first months, because they weren't all bad. There was something that felt real about being needed. My grandchildren were little and soft and they reached for me in the mornings, and I won't pretend that didn't matter. I made breakfast. I walked my grandson to the bus stop. I picked my granddaughter up from the half-day preschool program they enrolled her in after a few months. I did the laundry. I kept the kitchen clean. My daughter came home tired most evenings, and I had dinner on the table, and sometimes she would sit with me for a little while after the kids were in bed and we would drink decaf and talk, and those were good evenings. But something shifted, or maybe it didn't shift. Maybe I just started seeing what had always been true. The conversations about figuring something out stopped. Nobody found a daycare. Nobody looked very hard that I could tell. When I mentioned it once, gently, my daughter said that good child care in their area cost nearly $2,000 a month per child, and she said it the way you say something obvious to someone who is being slow to understand. I did the math in my head and didn't say anything else. I was not paid. That was never discussed. I had my pension, a little over $1,800 a month, and I paid for my own groceries when I remembered to. And sometimes I bought things for the kids, and slowly that money started to feel stretched in a way it never had in Dayton. My house on Elmwood was a problem I was trying not to think about. I was renting it to a young couple, which helped, but the rent was low because I had felt bad asking for more, and I had a property management situation that was costing me more than I expected, and every few months there was something, a water heater, a fence panel, a plumbing issue. And the money would come out of savings, and I would tell myself it was fine. In the second year, my son-in-law suggested I sell the house. He didn't phrase it as a suggestion. He said it as though it were obvious, the way he said most things. We were sitting at the kitchen table on the Sunday morning, and he had his laptop open, and he said that with the Columbus market being what it was, if I sold the Dayton house, I could put some of the equity into their home's addition. They had been talking about adding a proper in-law suite above the garage, and I would have a real space, a permanent space, and it would be good for everybody. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at her coffee mug. I want to tell you I said no immediately. I didn't. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to no one, which was my mistake. I had let myself get quietly isolated without realizing it. My Wednesday coffee friends were 90 minutes away. I had not made new friends in Columbus because I had no time and no car window of time that was my own. My sister lived in Phoenix and we talked on the phone, but I hadn't told her the full picture because I didn't want to worry her. And I think because saying it out loud would have made it too real. I sold my house on Elmwood. I put $60,000 into the addition above their garage. The suite was nice when it was finished. A bedroom, a bathroom, a small sitting area with a mini fridge and a microwave. My son-in-law called it my apartment. He said it like he was giving me something. My name was not on the deed. That didn't occur to me until later. The third year is the part I find hardest to explain, not because things got dramatically worse, but because of the way they got quietly smaller. I stopped being Winifred, their daughter's mother, their grandmother's grandma Freddie, and I became something functional, something expected. My presence in their house was so permanent and so built in that I think they stopped seeing me as a person who had chosen to be there. I was the variable that made everything else work. I watched the kids in the morning. I watched the kids in the afternoon. I had dinner ready by 6 because that was when my daughter got home and she liked to eat by 6:30. On the weekends, they had their social life. Dinner parties, their friends' kids' birthday parties, date nights, a weekend trip to Asheville in March for their anniversary that I did not begrudge them. And I was the mechanism that made all of that possible. I did not go to any dinner parties. I was not invited. Once, in January of that third year, my daughter's book club met at their house. 8 women, a bottle of wine each it seemed, a lot of laughter from the living room. I put the kids to bed and then I went upstairs to my suite and ate a sandwich and watched television. At some point my daughter knocked on my door and asked if I had any more of the lemon bars I had made that afternoon because they had finished the ones she'd brought down. I gave her the rest of the lemon bars. I did not go downstairs. I told myself this was normal. I told myself I was just giving them their privacy. I told myself a lot of things. In April, my daughter told me that her husband's parents were coming for Memorial Day weekend. His mother and father retired from outside of Pittsburgh. I said that sounded nice. She said they would be staying in the guest room. I said of course. She said she was thinking about having some of their friends over on Saturday for a cookout. She said it in a way that told me I would be cooking. I said sure. I started making a list in my head. What she said next, she said carefully, in a voice I recognized from when she was little and knew she was asking for something she wasn't supposed to ask. She said she was thinking it might be nice, since this was a more formal gathering, his parents, their couple friends, people they wanted to impress, if I maybe spent the evening upstairs. Not excluded, she said. Just it would be less complicated to explain. She said it fast. She said she hoped I understood. I sat with that for a moment. I asked her to explain what she meant by complicated. She said that sometimes when both families are there, it can be a weird dynamic. She said she just wanted the evening to go smoothly. I said, so you want me to cook the food for the party and then go upstairs so nobody has to explain who I am? She said I was making it sound worse than it was. I looked at her. My daughter. This woman I had held when she was an hour old, who I had driven to volleyball practice and helped move into her first apartment and sat with when her first relationship ended badly. And I thought, she believes this is reasonable. That was the moment, I think. Not the Memorial Day party itself, which I cooked and then watched from the window of my suite as people I didn't know ate my potato salad and corn on the cob and the ribs I had started at 10 in the morning. That was just the confirmation. The moment was the conversation in the kitchen when I understood that she genuinely did not see anything wrong with what she was asking. Memorial Day came and went. His parents were polite. They didn't know I existed, as far as I could tell. Or if they did, they thought I was some kind of household help. I didn't go downstairs. I ate leftover pasta I made in my microwave, and I called my sister in Phoenix. I told her everything. For the first time, all of it. The house. The $60,000. The lemon bars. The window upstairs. My sister was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Freddie, when are you leaving? I said I didn't know how. She said, I'll come help you. She flew in on a Thursday. We told my daughter she was visiting for the weekend. We did not say which weekend. My sister and I spent 2 days moving what I needed into a storage unit in Dayton. She drove the rental truck while I followed in my car. And on Friday afternoon, I called the attorney my sister had found for me, a woman who handled family and estate matters, and I explained my situation. She said the $60,000 was complicated but not hopeless, especially if I had documentation. I had documentation. I had kept a file, almost without knowing why. Call it 30 years of nursing instinct. You write things down. You keep records. I went back to my daughter's house on Friday night. I made dinner. I watched my grandchildren. I put them to bed and I read my grandson his book about the dog who learns to swim, and I held that feeling as long as I could. Saturday morning, my daughter and her husband slept in. His parents had gone back to Pittsburgh. My sister had already checked into a hotel nearby. I got up early and I made chicken and dumplings. The real kind, the all-morning kind. The kind that fills a house with a smell that means safety and home, and I set it on the stove on low. I wrote a letter. I had been drafting it in my head for weeks. I kept it short. I said that I loved her and I loved those children and that nothing in this letter changed that. I said I needed her to know that I had been in her house for 3 years and that I had given everything I had and that I had become invisible in the process. And I could not continue to live as a person whose presence required no explanation when it was useful and required no acknowledgement when it was not. I said I was not angry. I was tired. I said that I hoped, when she had time to sit with this, she might understand. I put the letter on the kitchen counter. I put the reading glasses I had borrowed from the windowsill back in my purse. I folded the dish towel and laid it flat next to the stove. I picked up my purse and my car keys. I closed the front door quietly because the kids were still asleep, and I did not want to wake them. I sat in my car for a moment in the driveway. The morning was warm already, a late May morning, and the dogwood at the edge of their yard was still blooming, pink and white. I had planted that dogwood. I had ordered it from a nursery in February, and dug the hole myself and watered it every other morning through a dry March and April. I had not thought about that until just now. I sat there and looked at it, and then I put the car in reverse and I left. I stayed with my sister in a hotel for 3 nights, which felt like recovery. We ordered room service the first night and watched old movies, and she did not make me talk about any of it until I was ready. By the second day, I was ready. We talked for a long time. She said things that were kind and things that were true, and a few things that were both. I found an apartment in Dayton, 2 blocks from where the coffee diner used to be. It had closed, but there was a new place on the same street that my friend told me was just as good. The apartment was smaller than my house on Elmwood, but it was mine, fully mine. No one sleeping down the hall, no one needing me by 6 a.m. I bought a small porch pot of geraniums for the balcony. I called my Wednesday friends. We started meeting again. The attorney sent a letter to my daughter and her husband in June. I am told my son-in-law called her office 3 times and wrote an email that she described to me, diplomatically, as heated. The situation with the $60,000 took time. It was resolved, finally, in a way I cannot go into detail about, but I will say that I did not walk away from 3 years of my life with nothing. I want other women to know that. My daughter called me for the first time 6 weeks after I left. She was not calling to apologize, not exactly. She was calling because my grandson had asked about me, asked where Grandma Freddie was, and she had not known what to say. I told her I was well. I told her to tell him I loved him and that I would send him a letter. I did send him a letter, 2 pages, with a drawing of the dog who learns to swim, that I did myself with colored pencils. The real conversation with my daughter came later. It was 3 months after I left. A Sunday afternoon, she called, and I could tell she had been preparing herself. She said she had been thinking. She said she knew that things had not been. And then she stopped and started again. She said, "Mom, I didn't see you. I think I just stopped seeing you." I said, "I know." She said, "I know." She said, "I don't know how that happened." I said, "I think it happened slowly. I think I let it happen slowly, too. I kept saying yes, and you kept asking, and neither of us said the true thing." She was quiet. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I am 64 years old, and I have been waiting for various people to see me clearly for a long time. My ex-husband didn't. My own mother was not the type. I had learned not to need it, or I thought I had learned not to need it. What I had actually learned was how to function without it, which is not the same thing. Sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday evening with my geraniums on the balcony and a cup of tea and nowhere to be, I am still learning the difference. I left my daughter's house 7 months ago. I have seen my grandchildren twice since then, carefully arranged visits that my daughter and I have both worked hard at. And the children ran to me and my grandson said, "Grandma Freddie, where were you?" And I said I was just away for a little while, getting some things sorted. And he seemed to accept that with the completeness that children accept most things. My granddaughter showed me a drawing she made of our whole family. I was in the drawing. She drew me with a big smile. There are things I would do differently. I would not have sold the house on Elmwood. I would have had the money conversation on the first month, not the third year. I would have kept 1 day a week, that was mine, completely, from the beginning. I would have called my sister more. But I am not here to tell you about regret. Regret is for the things you cannot change, and I have made my peace with what I cannot change. I am here because I know there are women listening to this who recognize something in it, who are sleeping down someone else's hall right now, and smiling at dinner tables where they are the help, and not the guest, and telling themselves this is just for a little while. It is not a little while. It is your life. I spent 31 years taking care of strangers in hospital rooms, and I know what it looks like when someone has been giving so long they have forgotten they are allowed to receive. I know what that hollow looks like behind a person's eyes. I saw it in my own face in the bathroom mirror of my daughter's house more times than I want to count. You can leave. I know it doesn't feel like you can. I know the children need you and the money is complicated and the logistics are impossible and you don't want to cause pain. I know all of that. I also know that I walked out a front door on a Saturday morning in May and drove 2 hours and I did not fall apart. I got a little apartment with a balcony. I planted geraniums. I had coffee with my friends on a Wednesday and I sat there for an hour and a half and no one needed anything from me and I thought, there it is. That is what I forgot I was. I am still learning how to receive. My sister sends me small gifts, a candle, a book, a card for no reason. My friends ask how I am and wait for the real answer. My grandson writes back when I write to him. Careful block letters, 1 sentence per page. My daughter and I are not where we were, but we are somewhere, and somewhere is more than nothing. I do not know what comes next. I am 64, not 84. I have time, more than I gave myself credit for. I have a pension and a settlement and a balcony and a whole ordinary Tuesday evening that belongs completely to me. I think that is enough to start with. I've thought a lot about how things become what they become. Not in a dramatic way, not some sudden collapse, but the slow, ordinary way that a door settles out of its frame over years until one day it simply won't close right anymore. That is what happened to me, and if I am being honest, I was part of how it happened. Every time I said yes when I should have said, "Let me think about that," I was teaching my daughter something. Every time I moved my needs to the back of the line without saying a word, I was showing her that my needs could be moved. She learned from what I did, not from what I felt. And what I did for 3 years was make myself smaller and quieter and more useful, and then wonder why no one could see me. That is not blame. That is just cause and effect, the plain version, the one that doesn't need any dressing up. What I know now, at 64, is that the people in our lives can only treat us the way we have shown them we are willing to be treated. My daughter is not a cruel person. She is a busy, distracted person who had an arrangement that worked very well for her, and I kept the arrangement running, and so she kept assuming it would run. The moment I stopped, the moment I picked up my purse and walked out, everything recalibrated. Not immediately, not without pain, but it recalibrated. That is how cause and effect actually works. It is not punishment. It is just information, finally delivered. The intelligence I wish I had found sooner was the kind that asks uncomfortable questions. Not just what do they need from me, but what do I need? Full stop. Not just how can I help, but is this arrangement actually fair? I had spent so long being the person who held things together, that I had stopped asking whether the thing I was holding together was worth the holding. That is not wisdom. That is habit dressed up as love. Courage, I think, is quieter than people make it sound. It was not loud when I folded that dish towel and set it on the counter. It was not dramatic when I started the car. It felt more like finally telling the truth after a very long time of not quite telling it. A little frightening, a little like relief. And underneath both of those, something solid. I do not regret the 3 years. I regret pieces of them, but I do not regret the morning I left. And I do not regret the attorney, and I do not regret calling my sister and saying out loud what I had been quietly knowing for a long time. Those things took courage I had to build slowly, and I built it out of everything that came before, even the parts that hurt. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this story, if you are the person sleeping down someone else's hall, making someone else's dinner party food, and watching from a window upstairs, I want you to know that leaving is not the same as failing. Staying silent is not the same as keeping the peace, and a life that is fully yours, even if it is smaller and quieter than the one you imagined, is worth more than a life where you are only visible when you are useful. I have geraniums on my balcony now. I have coffee with friends on Wednesday mornings. I have an evening, most evenings, that belongs entirely to me. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything.